So, for those listening, of course, welcome. We'll be reading a relatively short read, but an important one called Message to the Black Movement, a political statement from the Black Underground, Coordinating Committee of the Black Liberation Army, dedicated to all the comrades killed, captured, and exiled in the struggle to build the armed urban guerrilla front, and to those who supported us when all others refused to face up to reality. The season of struggle is our season. Introduction. The following is a political overview and statement of general political positions. We have written these positions from the perspective of the armed front because we feel that such a perspective is needed in the total revolutionary process for Black liberation. We are general in our public statement because we are essentially a military and political front. Therefore, it would not do to speak in any other terms, for the actions of the armed front will address themselves to the specifics of our people's national oppression. We do not wish the enemy to gain tactical insight in carrying out his repressive campaigns, while on the other hand, we do desire that the Black liberation movement understand the correct role armed struggle plays in a people struggle and how this role is in motion for us here in North America. The tool of analysis is for us a further development of the historical materialist method, the dialectical method. We will not even waste our time debating the values of Marxism with those who are emotionally hung up on white people, hung up to the point of ideological blindness. We understand the process of revolution, and fundamental to this understanding is this fact. Marxism is developed to a higher level when it is scientifically adapted to a people's unique national condition, becoming a new ideology altogether. Thus was the case in China, Guinea-Bissau, Vietnam, North Korea, and the People's Republic of the Congo, and many other socialist nations. For Black people here in North America, our struggle is not only unique, but it is the most sophisticated and advanced oppression of racial national minority in the whole world. We are the true 20th century slaves, and the use of the dialectical method, class struggle, and national liberation will find its highest development as a result of us. This dialectic holds true not only for Marxism, but for revolutionary nationalism as well. It holds true for concepts of revolutionary Pan-Africanism. It is true of the theoretical basis in developing revolutionary Black culture. All of these ideological trends will find their highest expression as a result of our advanced oppression. Yet, we must be ever mindful that the same objective process is true for reactionary refinement as a result of our struggle. This is the unity of opposites in struggle with each other. To defeat our enemy and render his reactionary allies impotent, we must have a truly revolutionary perspective informed by concepts of a revolutionary class struggle. A movement without such a perspective will fail to defeat our common oppressor. We are not afraid of white people controlling our movement, for our formations, guns, and ideas are built with our own hands, efforts, and blood. With this in mind, we address ourselves to the Black liberation struggle, its activist elements and organizations. Our call is for unity, for a national Black liberation front. We must build to win. That was from Yoruba or Nairuba, I'm not sure how to pronounce, Nyurba, from the Black Liberation Army. This next section is the overview. We will start with the basic fact that capitalism and imperialism as an economic system is in a deep crisis at home and abroad. The basis of this crisis is, of course, the exploitative relationships that capital must maintain in order to function. It is these economic, social, and political relationships that signal the eventual doom of our oppressors and this system of oppression under which we live. This crisis of capitalism is of a protracted nature. By this we mean it is a long process of deterioration that is spread over a considerable length of time. The seeming material wealth which we see all around us in no way contradicts this fact of decay, deterioration, or the fact of crisis. In fact, overproduction and uneven distribution have led time and time again to a bloated market, cutbacks in employment, and all the attendant ills of an economy based on private ownership of socially produced commodities. Inflation, soaring prices, and inadequate wages are all symptoms of an economy that is based primarily on class exploitation at home and national domination of the third world's resources abroad. The heightening of oppressed people's struggle abroad have added to the crisis of the entire Western world and threatened to cut drastically its essential resources. We realize that the chief economic and military power in the Western world and its ruling class, namely the United States of North America and its corporate financial ruling circles, will never allow the demise of its empire without a desperate fight. We, as blacks in North America, must realize that to seek inclusion into the prevailing socio-economic system is suicide in the long run, for the prevailing system cannot withstand the irresistible world trend of history, which is opposed to continued U.S. exploitation, racist domination, and subjugation. To fool ourselves into believing that equal opportunity and justice and social equality, in quotes, is the same as the capitalist system is a grave mistake with genocidal implications for every person of color. Our first obligation is to ourselves. This means our first obligation is to secure our total liberation from those forces that maintain our oppressive condition. Related to this self-obligation, not distinct from it, is our obligation to all oppressed peoples throughout the world. For in striving to liberate ourselves, we must abolish a system that enslaves others throughout the world. This, in essence, is our historical duty. We can either carry it out or betray it, but we most certainly will be judged accordingly by the world's peoples. The BLA, as a result of realizing the economical nature of the system under which we are forced to live, maintains the following principles: that we are anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, and anti-racist and anti-sexist, that we must of necessity strive for the abolishment of these systems and for the institution of socialistic relationships in which Black people have total and absolute control over their own destiny as people. In the order to abolish our system of oppression, we must utilize the science of class struggle, develop this science as it relates to our unique national condition. This next section is viewed from the armed front, the dialectic of revolutionary violence, law, and reformism. Our recognition of the economic contradictions of capital in no way obscures the social and political realities that now confront us in our struggle for Black liberation. To the contrary, it enhances and deepens our perspective and clarifies the dialectical role of armed struggle in our liberation process. We have begun to recognize and analyze those forces in a modern, technologically advanced society that set our particular struggle apart from other third world people's struggle, as well as the common factors all oppressed people share as a result of U.S. and Western imperialism. One such factor that sets our struggle apart from other struggles is the profound influence of organized technology on our consciousness, social relationships, and behavior. People who live in the technologically advanced societies of the West have been programmed to perceive their needs as being one and the same as the technology that created those artificial needs. Because the masses of working people do not control this technology, it has been consistently used to manipulate their whole lives. We are told what to buy, what to eat, what to hate, and what to love by rulers and controllers of an exploitative system. Technology in the context of capitalism is the ultimate means by which the masses are programmed out of the need for real freedom. A whole social value system has evolved to support the dependence on corporate state technological control. We no longer know what freedom is, what self-determination is. We perceive the value of competition as being in the natural order of human relationships, instead of contrary to the fact that people are social animals more attuned to cooperation than competition. We must create in the course of destroying our systems of oppression whole new value concepts that exist in dialectical opposition to the values that buttress our oppression. Even more than this, we must create a new need within ourselves for freedom so that we can harness technology on our behalf. As it stands now, Black people cannot even conceive of real freedom. We are afraid of real liberation because we have been programmed to be afraid by racist class oppression. Technology has immensely aided in reinforcing our fear of the dominant ruling circles. We must break this social psychosis. The BLA has undertaken armed struggle as a means by which the social psychosis of fear, awe, and love of everything white people define as being of value is purged from our people's minds. Our historical experience in North America has shown us that we as a people have always suffered while the racist ruling circles have never suffered. We have seen throughout our history pain, blood, rape, exploitation, poverty, our families torn asunder by a cruel and brutal culture, our youth murdered and socially crippled, our women degraded, our lives ever at the mercy of the cold American dream machine. We realize that the results of this historical experience has caused Black people to fear America's capacity for racist violence, and on the other hand, has reinforced the racist ruling circles in their attitudes of arrogance and confidence. The fact that the majority of whites who are equally oppressed and exploited do not really understand who their real enemy is does not deter us from doing what must be done to break not only our people's mental chains, but theirs as well. We therefore will illustrate, in the only terms that the ruling classes understand, the terms of blood, their blood. America must learn that Black people are not the eternal sufferers, the universal prisoners, the only ones who can feel pain. Revolutionary violence is therefore not a tactic of struggle, but a strategy. A strategy designed to drive the capitalist system further into crisis, while at the same time forcing all those responsible for oppression to realize that they too can bleed. They too can feel our pain. Only when this is realized will any just and equal decisions be made. Will we be conceded our right to self-determination? As it stands now, the powerful do not believe they can hurt and therefore find concession to our demands for liberation ridiculous. Our social psychotic fear of the racist ruling circles must be purged also, and only by developing our capacity to fight our enemy will this unreasonable and reactionary fear be eradicated from our social psyche. Revolutionary violence is not so much a self-cleansing process as it is a necessary ingredient in creating a psychological frame of mind amongst the ruling classes that our liberation must be granted. We must clarify revolutionary violence in relationship to our actual condition, because many of our people believe in the law, or at least the existing code of law of our oppressor. Most people do not see the real relationship between the development of Western law and the development of Western capitalism. Therefore, these people cannot deal with the reality of injustice as being an integral part of the prevailing system. Not a few people misunderstood the objective class function of the courts, the police, and various related institutions in maintaining the illusion of North American democracy. In a society such as exists here today, law is never impartial, never divorced from the economic relationships that brought it about. History clearly shows that in the course of the development of modern Western society, the code of law is the code of the dominant and most powerful class, made into laws for everyone. It is implemented by the establishing special quote-unquote armed organs that are obliged to enforce the prevailing class laws. In this historical period of human social development, such as the objective function of law, under such conditions of the most powerful economic and political classes. But what about the law in a democracy, especially one that claims that all its citizens can elect their representatives who in turn can create new laws? First of all, such a democracy does not exist in North America. Bourgeois democracy is essentially the dictatorship of what used to be termed the national bourgeoisie. There are a combination of reasons as to why this form of democracy as such is merely a means of political control that invites a design to subjugate its people. All of these reasons flow from the necessity to maintain exploitative capitalist relationships. Thus, the influence of corporate wealth on the politics of bourgeois democracy is merely an extension of private property's traditional influence and control of the so-called democratic process. The constant co-optation by ruling classes of the masses of working peoples, coupled with their complete control of technology and information, renders the so-called democratic process null and void. To a greater degree, all social and political institutions in a class society are reflections of the class organization of that society and the reflection of a given technological, economic arrangement and a supporting value system. The political organization of the most powerful classes or economic groups in a class society has to be and is the control by these classes over the entire society and its political system. We have found the democratic process under capitalism to be merely a means by which capital controls the masses. It is a means of mass diversion designed to keep the powerless classes politically impotent while at the same time fostering the illusion that real power can be gained through the electoral process. Black people should know better. In a nation based on the false principle of majority rule, we are a marginal minority, and therefore our right to self-determination cannot be won in the arena of our oppressor. The rejection of reformism, however, is much deeper than the above reasons. For if reformism is a rejection of any meaningful change, it is also a rejection of revolutionary violence, and therefore reformism is a functional ignorance of the dynamics of Black liberation. This is because the character of reformism is based on unprincipled class collaboration with our enemy. The ideals of class collaboration do not stand in opposition to our people's oppression, but instead consistently seeks to reform the oppressive system. Reform of the oppressive system can never benefit its victims. In the final analysis, the system of oppression was created to ensure the rule of particular racist classes and sanctify their capital. To seek reform, therefore, inevitably leads to or begins with the recognition of laws of our oppressor as being valid. Those within the movement who condemn the revolutionary violence of anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, and revolutionary Black nationalist groups are in essence weakening themselves. These fools do not understand the interactive need for revolutionary violence with other forms of struggle. And because they do not understand the real dynamics involved, they seriously inhibit the development of the liberation movement as a whole. These reformist and liberationist garb should understand that unless the movement cultivates its capacity to fight the enemy on all fronts, no front will secure any real victories. It is abysmal ignorance that imagines our oppression in any other terms than undeclared war. How will the movement as a whole be able to fight the oppressor in the future when all other quote-unquote legal methods are completely exhausted? How will we implement political struggle without the machinery and capacity for revolutionary violence when it is abundantly clear that our oppressor maintains armed organs of violence for the enforcement of his rule? We as a movement will be unable to fight in the future if we do not develop the capacity for revolutionary violence in the present. But revolutionary violence is not an alternative to mass movement and organization. It is a complementary to a mass struggle. It is another front in the total liberation process. Those who put the question of revolutionary violence in quote-unquote alternative terms are guilty of crippled politics at best, or reactionary politics at worst. Those involved in the total revolutionary process yet claim not to quote-unquote endorse revolutionary violence when it occurs are attempting to legitimize their existence at the expense of the entire struggle. The only legitimacy these people can possibly be seeking in such cases is bourgeois legitimacy. These type of people further confuse the masses, for revolutionary violence is not clarified and extended in order to undermine the psychological dependence Black people will have on racist reactionary legality. This is the vilest of sins, one for which everyone will pay during heightened repression. We therefore do not view the law of our class enemies as valid, nor do we feel restricted in struggle to his laws. On the other hand, we understand the tactical value of using the law, and consequently we understand the tactical value of reform in the liberation process. For example, school takeovers by community parents, rent strikes by tenants, labor union takeovers by descendant members, etc., utilizing their systems and built-in safeguards to obtain certain goals that place the enemy at a temporary disadvantage. But we maintain there is only tactical value to reform when there exist other forms of revolutionary struggle against the whole of the capitalist structure. Reform, as such, is inherently reactionary and perpetuates psychological dependence on the enemy, while confusing the true class contradictions between ourselves and the enemy. Considering these factors, we maintain that reform can never be anything more than a tactic, never a complete strategy, never offering in itself any revolutionary change. While it may offer the Black bourgeoisie rewards, it can never be the road to self-determination for the entire Black populace. We also strongly condemn those who claim to be progressive, yet depreciate revolutionary violence of an oppressed people in their struggle for liberation. There can be no conditions on our fight for freedom except those set by the oppressed themselves. Those who claim that revolutionary violence gives the enemy the opportunity to repress the movement in general are profoundly mistaken if they think the reactionary government needs such excuses for repression, or that the government does not recognize the real danger in allowing a movement to develop the full-blown capacity to wage armed struggle. The BLA has undertaken the task of building just such a capacity, along with other comrades on the clandestine level. This next section is called Why Build the Armed Front? We have chosen to build the armed front, the urban guerrilla front, not as an alternative to organizing masses of Black people, but because the liberation movement as a whole must prepare armed formations at each stage in its struggle. A failure to build these armed formations can be fatal to both the struggle and Black people. Our ultimate and strategic goal at this point in creating the apparatus of revolutionary violence is to weaken the enemy's capitalist state creating the same time. I'll read that again. Our ultimate or strategic goal at this point in creating the apparatus of revolutionary and nationalist groupings, and in this same process create the nucleus of armed clandestine organs which such a front would need in order to carry out its political tasks. These are the broad reasons for our devotion to armed struggle. The fact that no such national united front exists now in no way precludes the fact that the creation of one will become necessary in the future as the contradictions of capitalist society increase repression, racism, and social deterioration. We are of the opinion that subjective conditions are not right for such unity. Because of objective conditions, namely enemy activity and the relative low degree of unity within the Black struggle, we have decided to build the apparatus separate and distinct organizationally from all other mass type groups. This is a tactical necessity, but this tactical necessity does not contradict our strategic call for all groups in the Black liberation movement to form a national united front with the principle of armed action as one of many legitimate forms of political policy. At present, the contradictions that any BLA activities may cause are not to be avoided. Every progressive should welcome the exposure and development of contradictions, for it is through the development of contradictions that we will all move forward. Every brother, every sister on the side of liberation should and must support the struggle on all fronts and clarify to our people that acts of revolutionary violence committed against our common oppressors and class enemies of all colors. This means that revolutionary violence must be supported by those in the movement on all levels. While such support would be difficult at first, objective conditions and time will remove much of this difficulty, which is primarily ideological myopia to begin with. We know from experience that because of the class nature of our struggle and its racist aspect, many of our actions may very well be tactical actions of purely military psychological nature. And because of this, clear political support may seem quite difficult. Nonetheless, we intend to clarify all acts of revolutionary violence and accept responsibility for these acts. The important factor, however, is that the progressive movement, the liberation movement, and comrades on all levels of struggle understand that failure to support the armed urban guerrilla front militarily and politically is a failure to support the mass front, is a failure to support the legal thrust of our struggle in civil rights, and in the final analysis, an abdication of responsibility. Cowardice can be understood, but not opportunism, and an abdication of commitment to our total liberation. This next section is called Racism and Class. Our recognition of the class nature of our struggle has led us to certain objective conclusions which have been borne out by actual conditions. We have for some time now observed how the influence of certain class values determine how one acts or reacts in society. We have observed the class differences among the majority white population in the United States and the reflection of these differences among Black people. As we have said years before this, the class differences among Black people are differences in consciousness, attitude, and behavior. But unlike these same class differences among whites, economic status or economic position is not the major determinant. The overwhelmingly majority of Blacks, with the exception of very few, are essentially in the same economic class and suffer essentially the same relationship to the productive forces of capital. Despite this fact, however, the differences in consciousness and in attitudes are real, and therefore must be dealt with as if these attitudes were economic class distinctions. The reality of our people tell us that not only are there Black enemies of Black people, but that these Black enemies are first and foremost class enemies of our struggle for liberation. It is their class values, ideas, and class ideals that make them what they are. coupled with the fact that they are Black or of a so-called quote-unquote subculture. When this factor of culture is considered in proper perspective, we find that these enemies in blackface can hide among us, spreading their vicious reactionary liberal philosophies of gradualism, Black capitalism, integration, cultural nationalism, and reformism, etc. The reason why these Black class enemies find acceptance are many. The first and foremost reason is our unique social psychology, or our emotional response to racism. This reflex has primed us to think in terms of color first, just as it programmed whites to view color as a determinant factor. And when such thinking becomes culturally typical of us, we are vulnerable to class infiltration by Black enemies of our struggle. We tend to blame the color and not the class values of our oppressor when we are betrayed or exploited by one of our own people. Thus, when a Black person betrays or hurts us, we say, "Niggas ain't shit." This also indicates self-hatred and or self-pity. Instead, what we should say is that certain classes of niggas ain't shit. Why should we have such a class perspective and maintain class vigilance for ruling class lackeys? The first reason is that in a class society such as the one that we suffer under, every brand of thought, every form of behavior are stamped with the mark of a particular class. This has deep meaning for us, for the dominant classes in this country are white and their culture racist. We, as Blacks, reflect in our thinking the values and ideas of these dominant classes, as well as a defensive response to their social, cultural racism manifested in their system of rule. For these reasons, we are vulnerable. We can easily be misled, abused, and misused. We become easy targets for the racist ploys of our collective enemy. The enemy can use skin color to confuse us into thinking that if we attack another Black, we are necessarily attacking ourselves, when it may very well be the other way around. We are attacking him. It is to our advantage to have a clear, principled class view. It is to the oppressor's disadvantage if we are principled, class-conscious individuals opposed to unprincipled class collaboration. If we look at most of the organizations on the scene today and their philosophies, leadership, and methods of struggle, we will see the reflection of certain class ideals, ideas, and values. Overwhelmingly, these groups each reflect the goals of a particular class of Black folks. Without a revolutionary class perspective, we who are striving to acquire total emancipation from the forces which enslave the whole of our people will be unable to distinguish true friends from true enemies, those who are confused from those who are conscious tools of the oppressor, and we will not be able to win potential allies. This brings us to the dialectical role of culture. For if we understand that as members of a society or victims, we are all influenced by the class perspectives of that society, and for Black people, this means the values, standards, etc. of the dominant racist classes, then we must understand the tool by which we are programmed into these perspectives of class. Culture is the tool. We view culture as a means by which a dominant class programs the whole of society into that class's ideals, values, and standards, thereby perpetuating its dominance. This objective class function of culture should not lead us to the incorrect conclusion that if we adopt a quote-unquote cultural orientation in our fight for liberation, that such would be sufficient. This is the essential view of the cultural nationalists who orient all around culture. Such a view is incorrect, for it does not deal with the economic class and psychological basis of the struggle between two opposing cultural entities. The dominant reactionary culture must be destroyed before any revolutionary culture can truly manifest itself. In other words, it is in the active struggle of the two that the seeds of a revolutionary culture are laid, not in the passive creation of an alternative culture. Such can only be an alternative lifestyle allowed to exist at the will of the dominant capitalist culture. In this sense, cultural nationalism is bourgeois nationalism because it does not propose the abolishment of the capitalist system and culture. In dealing with the objective function of culture, then, we understand its social role in maintaining certain class relationships. A racist culture does this and more. A racist culture programs not only the members of the dominant racial groups into class ideals, standards, and values, but it also psychologically creates the necessary racist attitudes needed to maintain these class perspectives as a whole against the targets of that racism. Thus, the feelings of superiority, fear of blacks, and hostility towards the strivings of black people and all third world people in general is deeply ingrained into the white psyche, along with the class phobias and standards. Even more than this, the victims of the racist culture are programmed into feelings of self-hatred, inferiority, and impotency. Very often, this creates a mental social state that views the prevailing system as eternal and everlasting. Coupled with the class values of the dominant culture, Black folks are constantly torn between wanting what the oppressor defines as desirable and the inability to get it. Or to get it and then realize that it was only a hoax and he is still as Black as ever. All of this is crippling for the oppressed Black person, for it ties their brains irrevocably to their oppressors for salvation, often leading to the clownish pursuit of all that is defined as quote unquote good by the standards of the oppressor. In order to break these psychological class chains of the 20th century enslavement, we must build a revolutionary culture, a culture that not only programs our minds out of oppression, but at the same time impels us against the enemy classes and culture. The BLA contribution in building such a culture would be to strive to create an armed tradition of resistance to our oppression and to create a socio-psychological frame of mind on both oppressed and oppressor alike. That will lead to our eventual self-determination as a people. We therefore make few distinctions based on the color of our enemies. The same treatment will be meted out to white ruling class enemies and their lackeys as will be meted out to Black bootlickers and Black class enemies of our struggle. Our only consideration is that our armed formations and leadership are of our own people. This next section is called The Destructive Subculture, Crime, and Prison. The Black communities of the United States are the tragic results of class, race subjugation, an oppressive situation created and exploited by the rich white capitalist class of this corrupt country, and systemically perpetuated and reinforced through their various institutions. The wretched conditions that are inherent within these ghettos continue to exist not because there are no means of erasing them, but rather because they have proven profitable to the class that created them. The ruling class of the racist descendants of the chattel slaveholders. They have amassed a vast portion of the world's wealth through their rapacious practice of profiting off the misery and discomfort of humanity in general, and the third world people in particular. They use this enormous concentration of wealth to buy, bribe, steal, influence, murder, enslave, blackmail, control, and repress any nation, organization, group, or individual that would speak out against or offer any serious opposition to their self-imposed right to power. In order to maintain the present misarrangement, the social imbalances, the bourgeois class continues to use repressive tactics in various forms. The effects of this repression becomes clearly evident upon examination of the destructive subculture, the Black community born out of American politics. The subculture materialized out of the need of Black folks for security and a sense of belonging that have been denied them since their arrival in this country. An attempt by the rejected and dispossessed, a total deculturalized people, to integrate bourgeois society by imitating the lifestyle and adopting the value system of their oppressors. The destructive nature of this subculture manifests itself in the living reality of Black folks' attitudinal and philosophical outlook on life. The self-preserving quality of unity is almost totally absent in the Black community. In its place, there is an unhealthy atmosphere of individuality, which is detrimental and inconsistent with the needs of our people. For it is precisely this thinking that has kept us divided and unorganized for so long. It would seem that brothers and sisters would recognize the fact that by accepting and perpetuating the values of the class that oppresses us, that they are only aiding in their own genocide. They have all the physical evidence necessary to prove that the values that they now cherish so dearly are not complementary to their best interests. In our community, we continuously come face to face with the reality of our situation. The dilapidated fire hazard tenements, the Black mother with her unfed child, the brother who overdoses from the CIA's right to free enterprise, the sister that sells herself to an abominable pleasure-seeking fool, the unemployed, unskilled, miseducated remains of a once beautiful people. It's sickening to listen to quote-unquote Negroes talk about how much profit they've made from selling dope and pimping sisters, about the brand name automobile they're driving, while their children are starving because they have ceased to be men, or to hear some bad-talking, chicken-hearted punk describe how he has ripped off some poor Black's life savings because he does not have the courage to take it from the criminals who oppress us. We can't afford to continue as we have for the past 100 years if we expect to ever be in the position to determine the quality of our own lives, and more important, the lives of our children. Already the influence of the negative images projected by some Black folks have filtered down to our offspring. In their attempts to emulate their elders, Black kids are beginning to take on the psychological posture of the streetwise. They are being taught, through the words and actions, that the only way to get ahead in this world is to, quote unquote, get the money and go for self. Such values are more reflections of a potentially destructive subculture organized within the social order of a modern technological society. What we must understand is the institutional process that is constantly at work in our daily lives. Only with such an understanding can we begin to make the struggle for liberation a part of our people's everyday life, uniting the large objective struggle for liberation with our people's subjective struggle, and make them one continuous movement. Every institution in this racist class society serves the intended or unintended purpose of maintaining the attitudes and relationships of our destructive subculture. Welfare, housing agencies, system programs, courts, prisons, and countless other ruling class institutions reinforce negative relationships among Blacks. Our relationship and dependence on these enemy institutions is total, and only with their collapse can true alternative institutions prosper. But the process must begin now. We must not only build alternative social, economic, and political institutions, but we must intentionally sabotage, overload, and destroy existing ruling class institutions in the process. Part of our socialization process is the reality of prison and quote-unquote crime. Crime in a capitalist society has a class basis and is punished in accordance with this class basis. The whole of capitalist society is predicated upon exploitative relations, and thus lower class crime is a reflection of ruling class criminal values and practices. In the Black community, the average inmate is exposed to and preyed upon by these very criminal values. We knock each other in the head, rob each other, burglarize each other's apartments, sell dope as a means of, quote unquote, getting over, because we each want what the system of capital has defined as being of value, but has forbidden us to acquire in legitimate fashion. In a society that views a person's material things as determining his or her worth, we are the most hungry to be of worth. Crime is essentially illegitimate capitalism, and as such an arrangement. We are socialized into this distorted existence and can hardly see the root causes that make our community havens for dope sellers, Mac men, and hustlers. The reality of the Black experience in America has not only socialized us into living illegitimate lives in terms of capitalist law, but it has programmed us to expect and look to the very institutions that created this socialization in the first place for solutions to our plight. We ask for more police in our community when it is the police that serve as a repressive role in maintaining our oppression. We condone and glorify traitors and snitches when in the future our very survival will depend on ideals contrary to such vile acts. We ask for stiffer jail sentences for those convicted as criminals when it is prison that help maintain destructive social relations in our community. The fact that all of America is a prison escapes us. This reality has enabled Black folk to adapt so readily to the transition from quote-unquote street life to life behind the walls. There is a dialectical and fundamental relationship between the two that reinforces the destructive aspect of Black social relationships. The weakening of the Black family, the socialization of exploitative male-female relationships, the basic fabric that supports cultural genocide can all be found in the social role that prisons and crime play in a destructive subculture. Hardly a Black family, hardly a Black person is without at least one relative or friend behind prison walls, or know of someone in human cold storage. Our social acceptance of this cold fact is in reality our cultural response to the effective of powerlessness. I'll read that again. Our social acceptance of this cold fact is in reality our cultural response to the effect of powerlessness as a people. We must begin to determine our lives by creating community institutions of revolutionary justice outside the structure of capitalist law. This means we must create armed political organs in our community to enforce our community interests and create new values based on our people's social interests. It will not do to forego this vital aspect for our struggle. We must build it now. Why is the construction and maintenance of community-based armed cadres necessary? Because the enforcement of revolutionary justice in our communities is first a political question that cannot be answered by the existing oppressive system, but outside its control. Secondly, the very nature of corruption, crime in our communities, the negative class role of the courts, prisons, and other related institutions must be combated with enforcement of our own laws beneficial to our people in our struggle for liberation. Thirdly, if we construct our own agencies of revolutionary justice, arm them, and politicize their ranks, we are creating the necessary machinery for survival, while actively repressing those values and elements in our community that prey on our people. Finally, we should realize that until our powerless, poor, and unconscious people can call someone else other than the oppressor's stormtroopers for protection, we are ineffective as a revolutionary movement. Complementary to creating our own social force of quote-unquote law enforcement is the struggle to take over, dismantle, and weaken the oppressor's police apparatus in our community. This apparatus must be neutralized at the same time that our own apparatus is being built. The two are dialectically opposed to each other, yet there is a complementary aspect. Community control of police, residents of the police in the community in which they work are all reform issues that tactically are complementary to building our own system of community revolutionary justice. These reform issues should be the continued target of the mass front, while the creation of community-based armed cadres for the enforcement of revolutionary justice is the proper province of clandestine activity. We maintain that in the social revolution for Black liberation, it is a principal necessity that any creation of a national Black front must first and foremost deal with the social effects of a destructive subculture by creating and directing a system of revolutionary justice that will protect and defend our people against reactionary behavior. This is the social aspect of Black liberation for the immediate future. And that's the end of that section. So I encourage people, as they listen to this reading, to engage with it critically, to go and get the book or the PDF and read it for themselves again. Engage in conversations that might be difficult and challenging so that we can expand our understanding of what we're reading, so that we can apply what we learn and build strategies and programs within our communities that directly address our material conditions, and that in that way we can raise political consciousness within the masses and within ourselves, and then connect that to the broader liberation struggle globally.